A serial killer is delivering death door to door. Detectives move in to stop him before he kills again.
Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Bodies begin turning up in Northern California. Investigators search for a common denominator and find a pattern of uncommon cruelty. For years, a deadly predator has taunted police while snaring victim after victim. With every kill, he grows bolder, while authorities grow more desperate to catch him. Serial killers don't stop on their own. As the body count rises, investigators must use all of their resources to put an end to their murder by numbers. Some of the names in this episode have been changed. January 12, 1990 was another beautiful day in San Diego. But Chris Burns wasn't enjoying it. He was growing concerned over the whereabouts of his fiancée. When his roommates came home, Burns asked if they'd seen Tiffany Schultz, who also shared the apartment.
No, I haven't seen her all day. Why?
Because her car's downstairs.
Her car was in the parking lot, but in the several hours that Burns had been home, she hadn't appeared. The other roommates hadn't seen her either. Then they opened the door to a nightmare.
What's going on? Oh my God!
Schultz lay dead, partially disrobed and covered in blood.
You guys, call the cops. Get somebody here, all right?
Burns stayed with her while his roommates called police. As detectives interviewed Burns and his roommates, San Diego homicide investigators inspected the crime scene. One of the first things they noticed was that the body was posed, with outstretched arms and legs. Bruises indicated that the victim had struggled fiercely for her life. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. There was no sign of sexual assault. The answering machine tape was taken to check for suspicious messages. As the technicians continued working, Chris Burns told detectives his story.
And I put my hands up under her head like this to hold
They
her
noticed
head
his
so that I
hands
could-
and pants were marked with blood. The situation gave Sergeant Ed Petrick of the San Diego Police Homicide Unit grave doubts about Burns.
It seemed very odd to anybody that here would be a fellow that comes home, house is open, his girlfriend's nowhere around, but her keys are there, her car's there, her purse is there, but she's nowhere around. And there's a roommate's door to the bedroom that's closed, which is usually never closed, and he never bothers to knock or open it.
Burns was taken to the police station for further questioning about his fiancée's murder. He admitted that he and Schultz were having problems.
Let me tell you why I brought you in here.
The grisly slaying came at a time when they were supposedly trying to salvage their relationship. Lately, they couldn't get along. Now, Schultz was dead, and Burns looked like the main suspect. The blood on his clothes told police all they needed to know. But Burns claimed that the stain on his shirt came from touching Schultz after he discovered her dead. He believed the blood on his pants was his own, from a recent accident on the construction site where he worked. The story seemed too contrived. Chris Burns was arrested and charged with the murder of Tiffany Schultz.
I can do that.
It's not quite that.
Schultz's autopsy revealed she was stabbed nearly 60 times. While researching this brutal homicide case, Police learned that the victim was paying her way through college by dancing at a nightclub.
Oh, yeah.
The manager confirmed that Schultz's relationship with Burns was tumultuous. She told police that he didn't want her working there. They often came to blows over it. Their last incident had been recent. Transcripts from the answering machine tape contained an apology from Burns for the hard time he gave his fiancée about her job. But police wondered if he'd lost his temper and his control one last time. Only careful forensic analysis of the evidence could determine if Schultz was the victim of Burns's rage. Burns's shirt and pants were sent to the lab to determine whose blood was on them. To better see the bloodstains, the jeans were turned inside out. When the results were positive, ABO blood typing was performed. The blood on the shirt matched Schultz's AB blood type.
But I'm sure we should.
But the blood on the pants was type O, Burns's own type. Serologist Larry Turner of the Jackson Police Department Crime Lab performed the analysis.
Based on what I found, I was able to determine that the story that Chris Burns had been telling, it was possible that it was true. The blood on his clothing matched him and not that of Tiffany Schultz, and on his t-shirt where he said he had been down to touch her and possibly gotten some of her blood on the t-shirt, that was correct as well.
Burns's story, as odd as it seemed, might be true. Police had no other evidence with which to hold him. He was released, though still considered the prime suspect. But police would soon regret releasing him. On February 16, 1990, 1 month after Tiffany Schultz was found murdered, police got another call to the same apartment complex.
Take a deep breath.
Another
and
victim
try
had
to
been
relax
found,
a little bit.
brutally
Hey, Jay,
murdered.
What do you have?
We got this one in the kitchen.
The partially nude body of Janine Weinhold, a student at San Diego State University, was discovered by her roommate. She had been stabbed several times. As in the Schultz case, the killer also posed this body with the legs outstretched. Police feared they were dealing with a serial killer.
There just wasn't any question in our minds that it had to be the same suspect. Just the body position, the stab wound clusters in the chest, just looked like the same murder, basically, different room.
This murder occurred only about 100 yards from the apartment where the first victim was killed. Blood-stained clothes were found on the floor by the bed. The killer left the murder weapon, a carving knife, in the sink. But he left something else even more important. Seminal fluid was found on the bedspread. It provided evidence that the victim had been raped. It also provided police with their best hope for learning the killer's identity. In the lab, Larry Turner tested the evidence. In the early 90s, DNA testing was beyond the scope of most labs. Turner would have to rely on the older and less precise blood typing tests. He found that all of the blood and bodily fluids tested positive for type O.
What we're going to do is just...
The blood evidence cast further suspicion on Chris Burns, the primary suspect, who had type O blood.
take some of the material.
To be certain, Larry Turner analyzed the genetic markers within Burns's blood and in the fluid samples found at the murder scene. Genetic markers are inherited proteins that vary from individual to individual. While people may share some of the same ones, certain markers are more rare and can be used to make an ID. Genetic marker tests are dependable, but not nearly as precise as DNA. Turner found that the genetic markers of the suspect, Chris Burns, didn't match those taken from the second murder scene. That left investigators with 2 murders and no suspect.
Investigating the murder of the apartment complex.
They returned to the apartment complex and interviewed female residents to see if they'd seen anyone suspicious.
Okay, now what part
Police
of the space
feared
were
that
you in?
these 2 victims were just the beginning.
And you came from the park?
Yeah.
3400 Claremont Drive, that's right. in the
Detectives
light
created a list of over 1,000 suspects from the leads they gathered from the victims' friends and acquaintances.
About a block away. There's a couple of burglaries.
With 2 murders unsolved, the police were casting a wide net, trying to find their man before he killed again. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. On April 3rd, 1990, 2 months after the Weinhold murder, police received an urgent call. A woman had been found brutally stabbed.
It's a house or an apartment, sir. Sir, you need to calm down for me if you can. Okay, where is the suspect at in this?
A witness saw a man with a knife fleeing the scene, his face covered by a t-shirt.
Can you tell me, did he have the knife with him?
Police rushed to respond. They met Tammy Ho, who'd returned from the apartment swimming pool and found her friend, Holly Tarr, mortally wounded with a single stab through the heart. Holly Tarr's murder occurred in the same apartment building where the second victim, Janine Weinhold, was killed. Outside, police discovered the knife and the t-shirt held by the killer as he fled the scene. They also found a shoe print left in the mud, which they thought belonged to the suspect. Unfortunately, eyewitnesses couldn't identify him.
The girlfriend, Tammy, she basically couldn't give any description at all. Just, it was a male, you know, saw a flash go by. She couldn't help in that area. We had a second witness who at least pinned down the race of the suspect as being a black male.
The knife and t-shirt were clean of fingerprints or hair samples. After 3 murders, all investigators knew for sure was that the victims were all white females between the ages of 18 and 21, left semi-nude, posed with their legs outstretched and stabbed in the heart. All they knew about the killer was that he might be an African American. Because the slayings took place in the area of San Diego known as Claremont, the murderer was dubbed the Claremont Killer. A deadly predator, a serial killer, was on the loose. Police looked at their list of more than 1,000 suspects and, from those, re-interviewed all of their African American suspects again. Hundreds of blood and saliva samples were voluntarily obtained. While the samples were being tested, the killing continued. On May 22, 1990, another woman was murdered in her apartment in Mid-City, San Diego. The pattern of stab wounds was similar to the previous 3 murders. The Claremont Killer was on the move. 4 months later, 43-year-old Pamela Clark and her 18-year-old daughter Amber were found murdered in their San Diego home. Both partially nude bodies bore stab wounds around the heart and were posed like the previous victims.
There was no question after the double murder of the Clarks that things really, really got heated up. We had politicians show up at the mobile command post. I had detectives hadn't had a day off in 40 days, which was no problem. You know, we had to catch this guy. But we were back to square one.
Police had a terrifying killer on the loose with few clues and no idea of where he might strike next.
Okay.
Time was against them. Each day he ran free, more women were in danger. The Claremont killer laid low for 5 months, leaving San Diego investigators with nothing to go on. The trail heated up again on February 3rd, 1991, more than a year after he had made his first kill. Linda Parker, age 23, was about to take a shower when she heard noises at her front door. She looked through the peephole and saw a man trying to slip the lock. Linda Parker fled through her back door. She went to a neighbor's apartment, and together they confronted the would-be intruder,
Hey, buddy, what are you doing? Oh,
I was trying to get into my friend's apartment.
who mumbled an excuse as he left.
wrong building.
Parker's neighbor noted the make and model of the man's car. Meanwhile, Parker called police, reporting a possible encounter with the Claremont killer. Parker suspected the man at her door had stalked her from a nearby gym. A previous victim, Pamela Clark, had worked out at the same gym right before her murder. Perhaps this was the killer's current spot for scouting victims. Officers distributed flyers and asked people at the gym if they had seen the man or the vehicle that Parker described. The next day, they received a call. Someone had spotted the man on the flyers sitting in his car outside the gym. Police apprehended the suspect. His name was Cleophas Prince. Police had interviewed him months earlier. He had declined to provide a blood sample. Police needed a sample if they hoped to compare Prince's DNA to crime scene evidence. To win his consent, they didn't let on that he was a murder suspect.
Keep it up on the table.
They told him he was arrested for the attempted burglary of Linda Parker's home the prior day.
Did you know these credit
Investigators checked his credit cards. Each had the marks of having been used to slip door locks.
is buggered.
Prince cooperated and provided a blood sample without detectives having to resort to a warrant.
Hey, it can happen.
Until the DNA results came back, police didn't have enough evidence to hold him.
Yes, sir. That will
Prince
certainly
was
prove your
released,
innocence.
but he was kept under close surveillance. The blood sample was rushed to testing. If successful, the DNA would provide more solid evidence than genetic markers would. The problem was that in the early 90s, the technology was new, and it could take a year before the results came back. With nothing to hold the suspect, he would be free to kill again. With time running against them, investigators relied on a less comprehensive but faster test that would compare similarities between the sample and the crime scene DNA. If similarities existed, investigators could assume they were on the right track. If the DNA bore no superficial resemblance, they had the wrong man. Within a month, the results came back. The test indicated a match.
We just were, almost in tears. It was just unbelievable, the emotion involved in working with something and dealing with the families and all those crime scenes, and it was over.
Prince was located and arrested. Police were now able to gather more evidence and buy more time to run complete DNA tests. In Prince's possession were 2 rings that belonged to one of the victims. Police also found shoes with soles that matched the print left at a murder scene.
Hey, what's going on, bud?
Though police would never know what triggered his homicidal rage, they had a good idea of how his crimes evolved. Having perfected his craft as a burglar, he expanded his repertoire to include assault, rape, and murder. He tracked his victims from the gym and the pool, knowing that soon after they entered their apartments, they would be vulnerable while taking a shower. Prince would then break into their apartments and assault and stab them. Based on evidence gathered at the scenes, Prince was convicted of 6 murders. He awaits execution at San Quentin. Cleophas Prince actively sought his victims. Other serial killers wait for their prey to come to them. On May 3, 1983, in San Francisco, 2 55-gallon barrels were found in Golden Gate Park. Police had been called to the scene by 2 hikers who reported a foul odor coming from the barrels. Police suspected they might contain human remains. They were wrapped in plastic, their lids sealed with cement, but one was leaking. They were taken to police headquarters where they were x-rayed before they were opened so as not to disturb any evidence inside. The x-rays were sent to Dr. Boyd Stevens, chief medical examiner for the city and county of San Francisco.
One of the barrels had 2 bodies in it, and that was evident by 2 complete skeletons, including skulls and spinal columns, etc. One of the barrels had 1 body in it. We couldn't tell the sex at that time, but we could see that there were dental fillings, metal material consistent with bullet fragments or jackets, as well as identifying personal items like rings or earrings and so forth.
Now that they knew human remains were inside the barrels, investigators had to determine how they got there. Technicians took their time looking for any clues the killer might have left. Kenneth Moses, an inspector at the San Francisco Crime Lab, began by examining the exterior of the barrels. He hoped he could find some sort of print on the packaging or the tape. But getting clean fingerprints off tape can be tricky.
More oil.
Powder won't work because it sticks to everything. And most fingerprint chemicals dissolve the adhesive, destroying the print. Moses tried an experiment. By combining a dark blue dye, an antibiotic, and water, he concocted a dye called crystal violet. He hoped that when the tape was dipped into the solution, the antibiotic would stick to the protein left on a fingerprint, staining it purple.
After 14 hours of labor, slowly processing each strip of tape as it came off, we finally got down around 15 or 20 layers of tape to the last layer. Now, no prints were on any of those hundreds of yards of tape. Finally, we peel off the last piece of tape, put it into the crystal violet, and poof, up comes this beautiful fingerprint.
A simple magnifying glass revealed another crucial discovery. Presumably, the killer left a clear fingerprint behind in the fresh cement as he sealed one of the barrels. A synthetic polymer was mixed and carefully spread over the print. When it dried, it formed a near-perfect cast, which was then used to make a record of the print on paper. After 4 days of gathering all they could from the barrel's exteriors, investigators were ready to open them. One yielded the bodies of 2 nude females who'd been tied together. The women were later identified through their fingerprints as Glenda Wheatley and Paula Rodriguez, 2 prostitutes. Rodriguez worked for Thomas Michaels, identified as the clothed male victim in the other barrel. Each had been shot in the head. The victims had been ID'd, but the identity of their killer remained a mystery. Police spoke with friends of the victims, but none could shed any light on who could have done this. Investigators also ran the prints, but came up with no matches. 3 months after the barrels were found, a man driving on a rural road in California's San Mateo County, just outside of San Francisco, made a similarly gruesome discovery. He immediately summoned police. He led them to a bound female body with what looked like a bullet wound to the head. A grim trail of shredded clothing punctuated the horrific scene. Detective Sergeant Robert Morse deduced what it meant.
I need for you to go down to the...
She had nylon rope extending from both of her ankles, and it appeared as though she had been dragged down the road. And we later measured off the distance, and she had indeed been dragged for 1.9 miles.
15 foot for the sweater, blouse.
The entire area was secured, and each bit of evidence carefully noted. A garbage bag was found near the probable starting point of the brutal dragging. The first task after collecting all of the evidence was to identify the victim. Detectives ran a check on her fingerprints. She was identified as Marcia Geary, a prostitute from Oakland, California. Now, police knew her name. The next question was, how did she die?
The autopsy revealed that she had been shot in the back of the head, the trajectory going downward approximately 45 degrees. The entrance wound was an oblong shape, which is a little bit unusual.
The nylon-coated .38 caliber bullet recovered from the victim was also unusual. It had none of the lands and grooves that a gun barrel usually etches on a slug as it passes through. Police were baffled by what kind of weapon could have fired the fatal shot. The garbage bag from the crime scene was closely examined for fingerprints and other trace evidence. The bag was tested with cyanoacrylate, or superglue. When heated, the chemical's fumes attached to the prints, making them visible. A latent footprint was discovered that was much too large to belong to the victim. All investigators needed was a suspect to compare the footprint to.
Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate that.
Police questioned Marcia Geary's friends and family to learn where she'd been and whom she'd met recently. Her father said the last time he saw her, she'd asked him for money. She told him she was trying to find a job and asked him if he would help her get a car. Police also learned from her friends that she was planning to spend the weekend with a man.
Thank you. Thank you.
For now, his identity remained a mystery.
Okay.
The day after Marcia Geary was found, the body of Catherine Barrett was discovered in a San Francisco cul-de-sac. She'd been tortured and stabbed to death. Her body was wrapped in plastic. Metal shavings were retrieved from the wrapping. As police investigated this latest murder, they got a tip from a man named Raleigh Hill, the owner of Marcia Geary's apartment. Hill told police that Geary was planning to see a man named Jack for the weekend. Hill didn't know Jack's last name, but he knew he lived in a warehouse.
What'd she tell you about Jack?
Just that she was going to see him.
Hill said that on 2 occasions, he'd dropped Geary off there for dates. Hill gave police the address. It was 20 miles from where Geary's body was found.
Where Jack lives then.
Yeah, I could do that.
Get there and where it is. All right, take your team members.
The warehouse served as the offices of Anthony Electric, an electrical contracting business owned by a former police officer named Anthony John Sully,
We've explained that to you already. So here's how you
better known as Jack.
Okay, do you have any other questions about it? No. Okay.
Investigators also learned that friends of Catherine Barrett, the most recent victim, told them the day before her body was found that she was going to Anthony Electric. The news sparked their interest. The information gave them enough for a search warrant for the warehouse. They were about to learn the shocking truth about Jack Sully. A homicide investigation led to an electrical contractor's warehouse, where 2 murdered prostitutes were last reported to have been going.
Fort George William Sam 451.
A costumed woman wearing a tutu met police at the door. She led them to a small apartment in the rear of the warehouse. Among the litter of drug paraphernalia, police confronted a disoriented, partially clad Jack Sully. As they explored the room, the bizarre scene became grotesque.
Well, walking into this apartment, one gets the sense that it's almost like a torture chamber. He had a hook up on the ceiling. He had various ropes around. He had VCR tapes of pornography and sadism. And one would just get the feeling that it was a horrible place.
In a preliminary search of the apartment and surrounding warehouse, police found several important pieces of evidence, including a pistol with the barrel removed. It contained nylon-covered bullets, just like the one that killed Marcia Geary. A gun without a barrel might explain the odd oblong shape of the victim's wound, since a bullet shot from it would tend to be unstable and tumble instead of going straight. Jack Sully was arrested and charged with the murder of Marcia Geary.
Sheriff, go ahead and bring him this way.
The warehouse was now a crime scene and subject to a full-blown forensics investigation.
We photographed virtually every inch of it. We covered every inch of it. And we're happy that we did because we gained a lot of evidence out of it.
Finding anything in here at all? Got a couple cycles.
Among their finds were metal shavings and nylon rope, like those found at the crime scenes. Investigators also found blood, lots of it. The warehouse seemed to be a grim chamber of horrors, an inner sanctum for unspeakable acts of torture and cruelty. With Jack Sully behind bars, police began to ask his acquaintances what they knew about him. They learned he'd bragged about killing 3 people, putting them in barrels, and dumping them in Golden Gate Park. Now that a suspect was finally in custody, investigators could compare his prints against the ones taken from the barrels of the unsolved triple murder. As soon as he received samples of Sully's prints, Kenneth Moses knew the results.
I took a look at the prints, and believe me, I knew those prints by heart. The minute I saw Sully's prints, I knew this was the guy.
Sully was charged with the murders of the victims found in Golden Gate Park. Police also obtained his footprints. They compared them to the print lifted from the garbage bag found where Marcia Geary's body had been dragged. The prints matched. In the end, an insurmountable stack of forensics evidence was brought against Jack Sully. Metal shavings found in his warehouse matched shavings found on his second victim's body. The plastic sheeting found around the body of the man sealed in one of the 55-gallon barrels matched sheeting found in Jack Sully's truck. From the investigation, Sully's pattern of violence became clear. Under the influence of freebased cocaine, he would pick up prostitutes. When they arrived at his warehouse, he would subject them to prolonged periods of bondage, beatings, and sexual abuse, and ultimately, he murdered them. Forensics linked him to 5 victims, but other evidence proved he had killed 6. On June 3, 1986, Anthony John Sully was convicted of 6 counts of murder and sentenced to death in California. Serial killers follow no apparent rules except one: to blend in with everyone else. On June 28, 1989, in Riverside, California, 2 construction workers stopped on the side of the road to eat their lunch. But then they noticed the body of a woman lying at the bottom of an embankment. Officers and forensic technicians from Riverside County Sheriff's Office responded to their call. The victim was dressed in shorts and a man's Western-style shirt. A towel covered her body. She had no identification. The autopsy revealed the woman was strangled to death. A search of the fingerprints file identified her as Tara Biggs, a 28-year-old prostitute. Evidence collected from the crime scene was sent to the California Department of Justice Crime Lab. Investigators found little more than a few assorted fibers. Whoever killed this woman didn't leave much evidence behind. On December 13, 1989, in Riverside, California, another female victim, Pamela Martin, was discovered on a rural road. She appeared to have been killed elsewhere, redressed, and abandoned there. Like the woman found 6 months earlier, she too was a prostitute. There were other similarities. Police found fibers similar to those found on the first victim. They also found tire tracks. Photographs were taken for examination in the lab. The photographs were blown up to actual size. The tread pattern and wear marks would be unique to the killer's vehicle. Criminalists identified 2 different brands of tires. They determined the killer probably drove a truck or a van with an alignment problem, causing the front tires to wear more quickly than the rear. The similarities between the crime scenes linked the 2 murders to a single killer, and he wasn't finished yet. In the 16 months following the discovery of the first victim, 6 more prostitutes were found murdered in and around Riverside. The information on the tires proved invaluable, according to Steve Sikowski of the California Department of Justice Crime Lab.
As subsequent victims were found, we were armed with the information of what kind of tire track we would be looking for, and that would be one of the first things we could see whether or not, in fact, this is another one of the series that was developing.
When area police departments met to compare forensic evidence, they realized that along with the tire tracks, the hair and fiber evidence was consistent. Gray and red fibers, gold threads, and bits of rope were found on most of the bodies. These fibers lifted from the victims literally tied the murders together.
We were able to determine that, in fact, it looked like we had the same suspect environment from one victim to the next. And really what that meant to the investigation was it looked like we did in fact have a serial killer.
With each new murder, the killer grew bolder and more sadistic. Police found the body of another prostitute, Laura Mills, in a grove of trees, stabbed and strangled.
I don't know.
A peeled and partially eaten grapefruit lay nearby. This odd detail gave police an idea of the kind of monster they were dealing with, according to senior investigator Bob Creed.
To where he could just have murdered this person, strangled this person, stabbed this person, and then stood over her and ate a grapefruit. We felt that this told us something about the emotional makeup of this person that we were looking for.
Police seemed no closer to finding him. By 1991, 10 prostitutes had been murdered, and several had been redressed and left in rural areas. The only clues to the killer's identity were the fibers, hairs, and tire tracks that he left behind. But without suspects, this evidence amounted to nothing. Since the victims were prostitutes and drug users, police questioned women working the red light districts of Riverside and Elsinore. Men known to frequent these areas were investigated as potential suspects. One woman provided a description of a man who had roughed her up. A sketch was made from her description. It was distributed, but no lead surfaced. Investigators hoped to have better luck focusing on the killer's vehicle. The tires left their unique prints on each murder scene, and the interior may have provided the fibers found on the victims. If investigators could find his vehicle, they could find the killer.
So we let the investigators know to look for a vehicle with certain type tires on it. Let them know that they might be looking for a vehicle that had gray interior carpet. They might find some rope fibers. They might also find some other things in the van that had gold fibers in it, because we found a prevalence of gold type fibers. Maybe some blanket, sleeping bag along that line, because of the type fibers that we found on many of the victims.
At an earlier murder scene, police found the tread prints of a popular tennis shoe near the victim. As the spree of murders continued, forensic technicians began to see the same prints. As the tennis shoe's print continued turning up, the tread showed increasing wear. Likewise, the tire tracks found at the scenes were changing, as individual tires wore unevenly and had to be replaced. In January 1991, detectives from several area agencies met to create a task force. In July, with no end in sight, a behavioral scientist was brought in to study the crimes and create a profile of the killer. Since serial killers rarely kill outside of their race, the profile described a white male between the ages of 35 and 40. The police profile and other news of the serial killings filled the newspapers. It appeared that the suspect himself was following the report, as the next victim was Tracy O'Donnell, who'd been stabbed, strangled, posed, and mutilated. Though she shared these similarities with most of the other victims, one thing made her unique. She was African American.
That he read in the paper that the serial killer stays within their own race, and yet he went out and found this black prostitute and killed her. It seemed like he did that just to show us that we were wrong, and that perhaps maybe he selects his victims, that he's in control here.
The murderer was maintaining his anonymity, and he was becoming more defiant. By the end of 1991, his victims were being found at the terrifying rate of 1 per month. 19 dead female prostitutes had been discovered, and there would undoubtedly be more. Investigators in Riverside, California, on the trail of a brutal serial killer, finally got a break on January 9, 1992. An officer patrolling the red light district of Elsinore saw a man speaking to a prostitute from his van. The man drove off, making a right turn without signaling. The officer pulled the van over. The driver's name was William Suff. The officer thought his van fit the description of the vehicle of the suspected serial killer. He noticed the tires were mismatched, and each showed a different wear pattern. William Suff was placed under arrest. His van was impounded at the police station and given a thorough inspection. Police found a gold pillow and a sleeping bag. A blood-stained knife was wedged ominously between the driver's seat and the console. Investigators also found a length of rope, consistent with rope fibers found on the victims. While the knife and other evidence from the van went to the lab, investigators obtained a warrant to search Suff's home. There, they found a worn pair of sneakers that matched prints found near several of the earlier victims. Officers also found Western-style shirts, like the one that had been found on the first victim, and a stack of vehicle maintenance receipts. Back at the lab, DNA tests were performed on the knife found in Suff's van. The results matched the blood of the last victim. William Suff's blood, saliva, and other bodily fluids were tested to establish his DNA profile for comparison to fluid evidence found on some of the victims. In many cases, it was a match. Fiber from the gold pillow and sleeping bag, along with samples of Suff's hair, also matched evidence found at the crime scenes. Tire marks from Suff's van were consistent with imprints photographed at several locations. The vehicle maintenance records were also helpful in establishing when Suff had his tires rotated or changed. Police kept their own records of the tire positions at each crime scene. When they compared Suff's records with their own notes, they found an exact match. Police were able to surmise William Suff's homicidal pattern. He would cruise the red light districts.
Hi. I'm fine. How are you? Doing good. Good. You looking for a date?
When he chose a prostitute, he would invite her into his van and drive to a secluded place. He subdued his victims, tying them so he could torture and rape. Then he killed them, either by stabbing or strangulation. Occasionally, he dressed the victims in articles of his own clothing so he could move them without getting blood in his van. He made no effort to hide the remains. On July 19, 1995, William Suff was convicted of multiple murders. He was sentenced to death 12 times. A serial killer's compulsion for murder never stops. Once he finds a pattern that works, he'll stick with it time and again. But the pattern that provides his success also establishes a trail for those who are sworn to track him down.